Evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me. So tonight we're going to speak about the elections a little bit more. Hope everything's okay there. Give me a sound check if you feel like it. But yeah, I want to talk about a lot really to do with it. I want to start by looking at some stuff that's still ongoing. Talk a little bit about vote splitting and just everything. To be honest, it's a big lucky bag. It's a big sort of bookmark tab full of stuff I want to talk about here and there. So we'll try to tie it all together. Thank you for the sound check. So yeah, thanks for joining me, whether you're on YouTube. I forget that some people watch on Twitter as well, because I don't have it in front of me. So welcome there too. Yeah, I want to start by looking at the Ireland South stuff that's happening right now, the EU one for Ireland South that's currently in progress. There's loads there. There's loads to get into. So as I usually forget to do, you can support the channel. You can super chat on YouTube, and in the description on YouTube, you can follow me on Rumble, Twitter, Telegram, subscribe to me on YouTube. You can support the channel, keep it going with links there, etc. So in the bio on Twitter and in the description on YouTube. So let's get into it. I'll just screen share. Oh, I have to add that. Bear with me. It's always something. That should be active now. There we go. So, yeah, let's just jump into it. So the Ireland South, I'm looking at this here, and it's like one of the big questions is vote splitting, and sort of the theme for tonight is going to be like the idea of vote splitting, too many candidates, too much going on, and too many parties, right? And there's a question around that. Do you amalgamate all the parties in one big super party? Is that preferable? Is that possible? Etc. 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 That's what I want to get at. Probably, if there's a central theme to anything I'm talking about tonight, it's those questions. Too many chefs in the kitchen, both in terms of candidates and both in terms of parties. Whether that is soluble or solvable, whatever the word is, and whether that's preferable, etc. I want to get into that. That's a lot of what we'll go with. Also, some random stuff as well. You know, what Sinn Féin are saying, what Fianna Fáil are saying. I suppose the other thing is like the overall picture, stepping outside of nationalism and just looking at what this indicates about politics in Ireland, what this election indicates, if anything. I want to go about that too. So just kind of surveying the landscape a little bit. Now, bear in mind, a lot has shaken out already, but not everything has. There are some seats apparently still in play. There's one, I think, in Kildare somewhere. John Waters, I think, is still hanging on, or he says so anyway. So it's not over yet, but we have the general picture. So in terms of successes, failures, and all that, we have, from what I can see, you can add to this in the chat if you want to. From what I can see, we have Malachy Steenson in North Inner City, Dublin. Patrick Quinlan, I think Blanche. That's the big news from today as well. Congratulations to Patrick Quinlan. He did very well. It was a nail biter. I think it's a very, very significant victory. I think the most significant victory of all of them. And that's not favoritism or I like Patrick Quinlan, I don't like someone else. It's nothing like that. There's an objective significance to it. And I'm very delighted he won. There were some that I would have loved to go our way that didn't. It was kind of a real pity. Patrick Quinlan was one of the ones I wanted to go our way. And so it was nice at the kind of final hour a little bit for one of those ones I really had my eye on to go the right way. So you have Malachy Steenson, Patrick Quinlan, Gavin Pepper, and then you have Glenn Moore from the Irish Freedom Party, who also won his seat early on, or won a seat in the locals. And that's important. And, you know, in different ways, like Steenson is a local community man. He headed up the East Wall, says no protest. That's massive. That did translate into good, decent, strong electoral success in his area. And it sort of proved a point that you can be the leader of a grassroots, local anti-plantation movement and get a seat, get some political power or legitimacy from it. There's a lot to be said for that. And Stevenson is kind of like he has a background in politics and the rest of it. So it just it is a proof of concept in its own way. And then Gavin Pepper, similarly in Finglas, I think it is. He's very community oriented. You know, I remember way back, like he's talking about nationalism, immigration out of control, but he's also asking about playgrounds and Finglas that they're not getting in the rest of it, right? So very effective, very successful. And Glenn Moore, I know less about. That's no offense, but I just don't know as much about him. But I'll look into him a bit more. But the reason I think Patrick Quinlan was significant is because the National Party, oh my God, wading into that conversation. I successfully in the last year or two, all the drama around National Party, I have successfully kind of stayed out of it. I tend to stay out of these things, and I tend not to even behind the scenes. Those who know me behind the scenes could probably attest to this, that I'm not the biggest. It's not that I'll never, ever, ever pass a comment here or there on something, but I generally don't, even when in private, tend to go off on one side of things or whatever. I try to stay out of it all, like in the most, like in a sincere way. So yeah, that National Party, that kind of like last year in the National Party, without wading into it too much, it's been tumultuous, we'll say. And there's been a lot of mud slung in every direction, a lot of public acrimony and embarrassment and the rest of it, and in different directions. And so for Patrick Quinlan to be able to sort of, out of that bonfire, you could say, in a way, be able to engage with his local community enough, because that's clearly what clinched it, and get elected sort of in spite of the baggage of recent times, and for Stephen Redmond to nearly get it, and for Jan to nearly get it, is very significant. But that's sort of a side point. Putting aside the various iterations of the National Party and the rest of that, they are, like, despite the different iterations, one thing is true for the National Party in general, whatever version of it you're talking about, is that they are staunchly ideological. Their members are, their program is, the rest of it. They are quite ideological. I'm sure Patrick ran a very grassroots local campaign. He helped people with accessing housing and the rest of it. He did all that. But you won't find someone like Patrick Quinlan shying away from the ideological aspect. What I'm talking about is ideology, meaning you don't just take a sort of a value neutral, political neutral, ideas neutral stance on things and just say you want things to get better and you support your local community. You know, that works. You know, there's been jokes going around even with me, like memes online, and it's a different story, but about, like, you know, you're just a fat gone who talks about fixing potholes and like you get like 5 million votes, you know, that kind of thing. The game there is to stay away from ideology or something, but of course ideology is important. And I suppose I'm almost bastardizing or misusing the word there, because I don't even mean ideology like a strong, overbearing, crazy ideology. All I mean really is like the national idea. So talking about things that are, let's take immigration, right? Instead of saying the plantation center that got tried, was attempted to be put into my community recently, if you were like a local aspiring politician who went against it, let's say, and we have many of those, and you said, oh, there's not enough services, it's crazy the way it happened, the guards were overzealous and the rest of it. But I have no comment about mass immigration into Ireland in general, certainly not the West, but not even in Ireland, not even within the country. I have no comment on that. In fact, I have nothing against it. In fact, I'm all for it. I think it's wonderful, you know, towing the kind of regime line. I think it's great. I've nothing against it. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about locally, the guards were too much. We don't have the services. We didn't get consulted, right? That's a non-ideological position. The ideological position would be to grant all those aforementioned premises, but also say, well, it can't just be necessarily handed off into the rest of the country. You can't bring in 250,000 people in a year, and if we, random town don't take them, then they can magically be brought to somewhere else, and even though it's wrong in our town, somehow it'll be right for the next town. That's just sort of cowardice and running away from political totalitarianism at a state level. But the ideologue or the nationalist, the person who's thinking in the big ideas and unafraid to say it, says, no. It's not that they shouldn't be coming into my town. They shouldn't. But primarily, they shouldn't be coming into the country. Because, of course, if they have to come into the country, this is common sense stuff, obviously. If they come into the country, then they have to go somewhere. So, and some town will have to take them, and inevitably all towns have to take them. So, I mean, it's just basic mathematics, logic, like straightforward stuff. The country shouldn't be taking them. It can't take them. If your town is not to receive these migrants, then the country must not receive them, because the two are completely related, obviously. And only at that level can you push back against it. A bunch of different towns all clamoring for their own secret reasons to be against it. That doesn't form a coherent block. The state just keep pumping them in. They keep pepper spraying people. That's it. You don't have political opposition to it. You have a bunch of people who are gaining credibility from opposing it at a local level, but all siloed away in their own individual blocks, deathly afraid to say something that isn't actually radical at all, which is that we shouldn't be taking these people. Ireland does belong to the Irish, actually. I don't want to become a minority. I don't hate anyone. I'm not a lunatic. I don't want every foreigner gone from Ireland, the rest of it. But we shouldn't become a minority. We weren't asked. Most people would be against it. The numbers, if they come into the country, will affect towns, and so the two are linked. So we're all going to come together and be honest about that. Like I say, they all run from it. Even the independent Ireland, and certainly the N2s and all that, they'll kind of do it too. And so maybe ideologue is the wrong word. Maybe I'm lacking the correct word. Maybe the word is just someone who is honest about it. And a nationalist really is the word. Someone who's a nationalist. They're look, if they're a councillor, they're going to look after their local community, but fundamentally they're a nationalist. They're about the country overall. They don't, and this is the problem with local politics and parochialism in Ireland. The real problem is that the highest value is being Mr. Gombeen for your little parish of 400 people or whatever. And I'm not going to get involved in all that other stuff, but of course, inevitably, even if your town rejects the centre, which is unlikely by itself, even if it does, the next one will be back in 3 years. So you're not actually doing it. All you're doing is sucking up the political credibility from the whole situation, getting all the votes, getting all the kudos, getting the support temporarily from nationalists online and around the country who support you. And then you turn around and disavow it all and throw it all in the bin. It's like, that is not, like, nothing changes with that. And so that's why someone who has a coherent, unafraid, unapologetic view on the whole thing matters. And the reason I would even distinguish, and this isn't a better or worse thing, because I've mentioned how effective and hardworking and all the rest of it Malachy Stevenson and Gavin Pepper are. But this is just apples and oranges, different things, right? I could talk for 20 minutes about how good they are and what they do and how important they are as activists and politicians. But right now I'm talking about Patrick Quinlan, so I'm going to highlight where his score is up, where his score is particularly important, which is even the two lads. Malachy has opposed the East Wall thing. He's been totally frank. So has Gavin. They have. But what I'm saying is someone like Patrick Quinlan is a bit more ideological, a bit more deep into the real nitty gritty of the politics, not the politics, but the demographics, the national sovereignty, all this kind of stuff. He accentuates that aspect of it quite a bit, which is why he gets probably even more, it's a kind of called far right. You even saw with the opposition, they're saying, oh, this is the real deal, this, whatever, because they're sort of ideological. And that's what is the ultimate sort of taboo, to be that way, I think. And so with the different baggage from the National Party and with the fact that they're just so stridently ideological, there are even times, for example, with the National Party, whatever version of it you want to take, there are times where I myself personally, my taste, where there are times where I go, or depending on the event, where I think there, depending on which person in the party and all that, but there are times where there's a there's a there's a tendency within the National Party to, in my opinion, be too ideological. So on a different day, I could give a constructive critique or opinion on how it could be too much this way or that way. But regardless, in some ways it's good. In some ways, sometimes depending on the situation, it could be not so good. Whatever. But the fact is, they are that way. Within this right-wing political spectrum in Ireland, there's all parties have their sort of facets, and that one, a national party, are known for being strident, really strident on the ideas about immigration and Irish demography and ethnicity and all the usuals. And so for someone who's very explicitly, long-windedly, almost straightforward about the ideas, to get a seat is a very big thing. Malachy Steenson and Gavin Pepper got in, Glenn Moore got in, and what I was looking for, it's almost like, it's weird because it's like, if only National Party lads got in, I'd be lamenting the fact that a Malachy or a Gavin didn't get in, because they bring something of their own to the table. And similarly, if just Malachy and Gavin got in and a couple of others, and Glenn Moore perhaps, I would have been lamenting the fact that, well, it would have been nice as well to just kind of round the dish a little bit. It would have been nice to have a Derek Bly or a Phil or a Patrick Quinlan. They come from a different era and stuff like that. It would have been nice to have a nice rounded kind of a couple of cut from this cloth, a couple cut from that cloth, a few posh class, a few working class estate lads, a few, you want a bit of, it'd be nice when people win to think, oh yeah, we got a little peppering of different stuff. And so had Quinlan not won, it would have been missing a certain something, in my opinion. And that's very important. So fair play to him for pulling that out of the hat. Commiserations to Jan and to Stephen Redmond and perhaps a few others who didn't, and everyone else. But that's just my view on that a little bit. So actually, I just want to give you one example. So if you want to talk, the way I'm talking about Patrick Quinlan, and I don't even know the guy, I've spoken to him a few times. We've been in touch. He's done me favors. He's been sound to me. We get on well, but like we've probably only spoken a handful of times briefly and stuff, right? So I don't know the guy, but at a sort of professional level of like observing him, I could see him moderating for a certain amount of political expediency. Let's say having a sophisticated take where it doesn't have to be the most radical thing all the time, reasonable. But I don't think I could ever see him come out and sort of dispense with the fundamentals, like go down Gombean Avenue, basically, or like Opportunist Avenue, Opportunist Boulevard, to just succeed as a politician, become an amoral reptilian, basically, just for the money, the political advantage, whatever. I can't ever see him. And that's not to say, by the way, Glenmore, the other three at all. I'm not saying that at all. But or there's other people. I have a list here. I'm going to get into it. There's more people as well. But like, especially because of Patrick Quinlan's background as being sort of stridently ideological about the whole thing, and has been for years and years and years, it just means, it means that he's very fixed in place. And then he's clearly quite competent and the rest of it. So I, just as a person in general, I'd say. So it just bodes very well. But and also I see people talking about Blanche. Blanche is like half of the people there are foreigners as well. So that makes it an extra, and there's probably political like vote corruption and stuff maybe there too. So for him to be able to pull that rabbit out of the hat is all the more impressive. So I have tabs here. So there's one I wanted to show you, and I find it actually very disappointing, to be honest. So where is it? I'm looking for Seamus Walsh Loves People is what I titled this tab. It's just an example of what I'm talking about, where you actually need people who are, I keep using the word ideologically nationalist, people who are ideologically anti-immigration, where they're not just anti-immigration because, people aren't getting checked enough at the airport. There should be more passport checks, or I'm for it for the most part, but just like maybe ease up on the criminals, or something like that. There's that, and then people saying, "Oh well, the community should be consulted a little bit better." Mary Lou McDonald will tell you that. Simon Harris will tell you that. Patrick Tobin will tell you that. Um, Micheál Martin will tell you that. The lizard on the street will tell you that, right? But the that's obviously not fitting to what most like at least a huge category of people, probably all of you watching, and a very influential little subculture of people in Ireland. That's not what anyone really wants. And never mind the subculture. Take somewhere like Uachtarard or whatever. The leaders will talk a certain way, but and I know this through experience because there were a couple of people in Uachtarard for a while who had spoken to me very stridently about, we don't want all these foreigners coming into the country, we'll be a minority, and we don't want this and that, and rough enough, to the point, very politically incorrect language, who were quick afterwards to threaten, to say that when the heat came on, to say that I had influenced them, I'd brainwashed them and all this, and this is only a couple of people, but some of them did. Some of them were on the brink of trying to throw me under the bus. And I remember that. So there are a certain cadre of people who will be like that in Ireland, and people in general. But that whether it's Uachtarard or whether it's Finglas or whether it's Ballyphehane or Bishopstown or you name it, right? Uh, Most people in private, I have examples of this. I mean, I can tell you examples of like the public opinion and the private opinion. So most people just want it all stopped. And when you have someone like Patrick Quinlan or someone like me or someone like whoever, I'd include Pepper or Steenson, all the rest of them. But the point is, people who are not just giving the most sugar-coated, devoid of all substance point possible. People who are given the real message, really. That's what is needed. That's where the populist energy must be directed to, or that's what the ethos that must be proliferated as things go forward, because otherwise it is just around in circles. It's people who will say a thing for an election and then they'll go back into their hiding hole and just govern or speak like basically Simon Harris. I've often said, so Patrick Tobin meant to be like the conservative nationalist, respectable option. Basically, it's indistinguishable between Simon Harris or Mary Lou or Micheál Martin. But that's a problem. That basically has to be a sort of a taboo among all reasonable people. And again, you could say, am I asking a lot? Am I asking for people to get, the Brian Boru edition of calipers out and start going around measuring people's heads for Gale, purity or something like that? No, I'm not being weird. I'm just saying people who will publicly state what is really going on and will publicly speak to the issue which they are profiting from politically, one way or another. That's all. It's really, and what I'm talking about is, we can't have infinity immigration. We have to stop it. We have to reverse it. Irish people shouldn't become a minority, etc., etc. Totally reasonable. There's nothing objectively controversial. It's only from political control that is made controversial. And so you just need these individuals who are presenting themselves as some sort of nationalist, populist, local troubadour against the plantation centre, or troubadour, the word, crusader or whatever. They can't have it both ways. It just has to be, somehow that has to be point has to be forced. I don't know how. And here's a classic example of it, right? So this guy is Seamus Walsh is his name. I actually had great faith in him, and in, what's your man's name? Noel Thomas is the other one. They were, if you don't remember, they were two councillors who had the balls, credit where it's due, to stand with their people, the people of Uachtarard, Rosslake, wherever, that kind of region of Galway. They stood with the people there against a proposed plantation centre in Rosslake House Hotel, which was bought for restoration as a Instagram influencer story by these Americans. If you don't know about that, it's a story for another day, but it's hilarious, right? And then they bunked. They shut down all their social media because what they did basically was they realized that it was going to be hard to restore this house. The Instagram versus reality wasn't going to work out for them. It was actually a big, tough project. And they obviously saw that the dollar signs when they heard about the plantation thing. So they just decided to, oh, yeah, we're going to sell it and fill it with Pakistanis or whatever, tuck our tails and run with our big check. And when when they were discovered who they were, the people who had sold it to or leased it to the state or whatever, and they started getting blowback, people were like, wait, I thought you were going to do this up old style and prance around in your woolly jumper and stuff and make it an online influencer story, and now you're doing the most sordid thing ever against the local community. The social media went away. They went to ground. It was very funny. But anyway, it's such a story in itself, story within a story. But the people were against it. They felled trees to block the road. Like, they went hardcore because they had seen what was attempted in Oughterard years ago. They know the crack. The people know the crack. And the two local councillors, Noel Thomas and Seamus Walsh, stood with the people. And even when the building mysteriously burnt to the ground one night in Ross Lake House Hotel, they sort of came out, and I was very impressed because they said, listen, we're not condoning anything that may or may not have been done by anyone. Could have been electrical, could have been climate change, could have been, what's the word? Disgruntled fairies, etc. But they didn't, whatever happened there, they didn't come out and sort of clutch their pearls and sort of turn on their own community under the pressure of what had happened to the house. They just said, yeah, we don't condone what happened there, and we don't know what happened there, but we stand with the people here against all these people being brought in, immigrants, fake asylum seekers. And that, I was like, that shows balls, actually. And they defied their own party, Fianna Fáil, and they basically became dissidents within their own party, and they publicly spoke out against the leader, Micheál Martin, and they even ended up, Noel Thomas ended up getting his house getting a dawn raid, all his phones seized and devices and all that. He ended up getting the dissident treatment, right? Just for basically saying, I'm elected by these people locally, and you know what? I'm not going to do the snaky thing where I talk out of 10 sides of my mouth and I sort of flamos them, but then I really sell them down the river, and I liaise with the Department of Immigration or whatever, and that they actually stood with the people, and they ended up getting called far right, this, that, and the other. I think it was the Ditch put out articles, as they tend to do, about petty shite, about Seamus Walsh. His son had built a house on his property without planning permission or something like that. They were trying to hang them up on smears. They were calling them scare words like far right. They were raiding Noel Thomas's house. I was like, okay, this is a sign that these guys are the real deal. They look and sound like they're the real deal, and they're being treated by the state like they're the real deal. Like, they're local Gombini types, councillor types, but they seem to have, through the crucible of this experience, sort of on fast mode, caught up to where ideologues or people like me and probably you are. They've sort of had a crash course in it, and the crash course, they haven't run away from it. They've thought, oh, this is bad. Noel Thomas was talking about how Micheál Martin is more interested in answering to international people than to his own people and his own party. I was thinking, this is great. These lads I had great faith and I spoke well of them. And sure enough, perhaps once a Gombeen, always a Gombeen. I don't know. But after being re-elected, because they're local, they're these types who'll always get elected, right? The local lads down the GA club and the pub or whatever it is, great man altogether. So they're, as expected, they're re-elected, and especially after supporting the local area on the asylum thing, I'm sure their votes probably skyrocketed. But they're doing interviews and stuff afterwards. Now, I'll preface what he says here, right? Because he ends up basically disavowing the whole thing a little bit. He ends up disavowing the national idea, is what I'm saying, as opposed to the local parish idea, which is just, how are we ever going to get anywhere if this is the issue, if this is how people go about things? Now, bear in mind, am I giving out to him because he didn't want to break out Brian Brew's, edition of calipers and start 23andMeing people, 5-year-old children, and drop kicking them off the Giant's Causeway. No, I'm not saying he needs to be some sort of lunatic. I'm saying that he could just either have a neutral position, sort of no comment either way on it, just take the win, all good. Or he could say, well, they call me a NAZI word. They called me far right. Of course, I'm not. I'm a normal person. And do you know what? These words are thrown around willy-nilly. People who just don't want their country being totally swamped, get called this. And it's really nonsense. And at the end, basically either neutral, say nothing, or if you're going to say something on that issue of demonization, kind of reject the concept of the demonization and somewhat altogether, as opposed to just trying to pass the buck. But what does he do? He does this. By the way, I am getting somewhere. I'm going to build. Some people don't get this. Some people who don't like my rambles, or they think I'm long-winded or circuitous. I think by the end, if you ever watch it back, I do tend to move it. It all tends to lead to a point. So just if you're wondering, right, I'm getting somewhere with all this bigger picture. Listen to this. Oh, come on to fuck.
To be honest with you,
yeah.
I switched my ball, which is, in fact, the people switched me, because the people wanted me out of Fianna Fáil. They totally were disgusted with the way Micheál Martin was behaving. They were totally disgusted with the bureaucracy in Dublin, Helen McEntee, the whole thing. It was an absolute sham. The way they tried to mix up migration with IPAS and with this absolute catastrophe of what's happening to our country. We have never been right-wing. We are not right-wing. We love people. We are good to people. But we are disgusted with the way the government is mishandling the immigration issue. And because we were willing to speak out on behalf of our community, every kind of blackness was used and every kind of blackmail, trying to mix up migration with the IPAS situation, trying to mix up the right wing with decent, honest living people in the Roscahill area.
So that's there's a little tinge of independent Ireland narrative to that, who claim they're just a bunch of independents, but let's be real, they have their party line, right? But there's also just a sort of a feeling of just petty, like, weakness or whatever. He got his seat. I'm sure he's delighted, happy days. But to say we're not right wing, we love people. We love people. It's nothing to do with immigration. So basically saying it's nothing to do with immigration. So if you bring in 250,000 people and just provided you exclude minus the 30,000 IPAS or whatever, right? Let's say you bring in 200,000 Indian people on visas. They're tested for crime. They're tested for IQ. They're high, smart, no crime. Well, there are reasons why that's wrong. They're economic, social, national, everything, reasons why that's wrong. Now, I'll say that, but does that mean that I'm right wing? And if I'm right wing and he says I'm not right wing, we love people. I love people too, right? Like, of course I love people. I love Irish people. I love all other people. If they're good people, I like them. I'm a normal person. I'm very curious about other cultures. I like meeting some foreign people in Ireland sometimes, chatting away to them. It's kind of like, I don't know what sort of picture you're trying to paint, but whatever frame you're trying to paint for yourself, I think I'm in there too. So I don't know where you're getting this sort of thing from. So it's okay to oppose IPAS for not described reasons. And it's okay to reject basically what is, let's boil it down, a bunch of foreigners being shipped into your town. But it's not okay to oppose immigration in general. It's not okay to, let's say if I said I don't want Irish people to come and become a minority. Oh, that's crazy stuff. That's far right stuff. We're not far right. We're not right wing. He didn't even say far right, just right wing. We love people. Okay, so because I don't want Irish people to become a minority in Ireland, I don't love people. Like, because I think immigration overall should be totally stripped back and we should go to net negative immigration and the rest of it. Like, so it means I don't like people. I hate people, but you love people. Like, and even though they all called you far right for your whatever your stance is, it's not true when they say it about you, but it is true if they say it about me, or if you say it about me. What's your logic there? Like, if you actually put these questions to him, I don't know what he'd say. But my point is really, is not to be like, I want Seamus Walsh to say everything I say. I want him to bear the burden of a big national sort of countercultural revolutionary idea. I'm not saying that. I'll say it. I'll say it here on stream, and you say, I'm very glad to have been elected. People call me all sorts of slurs and derogatory things, but that's not true. I'm a good person. Leave it at that. But he intentionally, multiple times, mentions it's nothing to do with immigration. We're not bad. So thus, I suppose the implication is that if it were to do with immigration, is a general subject, then you would be bad. So basically, he's basically sort of leapfrogging from a sort of a literal sort of when it comes to the local area, just in the immediate present, torches and pitchforks, right? And they could say what they want. No to inhumane direct provision. Look, you can lie all you want. That's one thing about me. I'm not lying about it. I'm just telling you. I'm saying what you're not saying, right? You could say it's about inhumane direct provision, and it's not about, look, at the end of the day, left, right, up, down, everyone saw what happened. They were trying to bring busloads of random Pakistani, Nigerian, Algerian men into your town, a load of foreigners, right? Like very foreign people, men, into your town. And it's not primarily about services. It's not primarily about consultation. It's not primarily about any of that stuff, although it is about those things. It's primarily about the fact that you don't want, I sound Brazilian. You don't want a convoy of buses full of foreigners being brought into your community, because ultimately that's just something nobody really wants ever in the world, in any community or country ever, right? That's almost like a universal thing, against your will, the rest of it. So you're going to leapfrog from that position, pitchforks, torches out, trees felled, whatever happened, a building burned to the ground, and everyone's against it, and we all know where they are. You're going to leapfrog from that to having a position that's barely distinct from the Immigrant Council of Ireland, Brian Killoran, Mark Malone, Claire Byrne, Simon Harris, something like that, right? Yeah, I mean, that's like that's more or less where they're at, sort of, right? This kind of vague thing. Excuse me. And it's sort of like, you saw what happened. You got a big mandate in your area. Everyone voted for you. That was a foregone conclusion. So where's the need to have to say that? Well, who are you trying to placate? Are you trying to placate NGOs, the media, or whatever? If you just said to the media, we're very happy with our win, it had something to do with the way they tried to force people into our community against our will, and it's not right, and we don't have services, or something like that. But where's the need? Who put the gun to this guy's head to go well out of his way to explicitly condemn the idea that you could be against mass immigration overall policy, and the rest of it, and anything to do with right wing? Like, what's that? Like, if you said to him, oh, it's been implied that you're left wing, someone said something about your policy, or something you did, or something you signed off on had kind of left wing connotations, he'd probably sort of look at them and think, okay, I don't really care. So why are you suddenly allergic to something like that? But it's maybe you can think I'm off on a tangent. I should just talk about something else. But this is the reason I bring that up, is because I want to sort of emphasize, as there's this like there are people here, right? I have a list as well, so it doesn't stop with Glenn Moore, Gavin Pepper, Gavin Quinlan, and Malachy Steenson. They are real deal to varying extents. Like, they have different approaches and all that, but they've all been pretty straightforward about immigration and all that, and they're not selling people down the river. They're not playing along with the party line of the government and stuff. So that's good. But then after that, you have other people. It's not just those that got elected. There are sort of adjacent people. There's Phil Sutcliffe, I think is his name, Conor McGregor's boxing coach in his youth. and Conor supported him, and we know where Conor stands, right? See, that's the difference. Compare a Seamus Walsh to a Conor McGregor, right? You know what I mean? Conor comes out with it, like, and you know, Conor's not got a lot to lose. He's got his business and his whatever, his profile, but you know, Conor knows that if he puts out some base tweets, more people will love it than hate it. And if he keeps it within reason, he probably won't lose the business deals and stuff like, because people like, that's his brand, to be a kind of fuck you type anyway. So he knows that he's got wiggle room to not sell people down the river and promote the real message, kind of, and he does so time once in a while. I just feel the same for Seamus Walsh. It's like, listen, no one's asking you to come out and put on a fucking, you know, 1940s uniforms or whatever, right, and march around the place. It's just like, you don't have to condemn the basic idea of like immigration and stuff like that. You could just say nothing, at least. And my point as regards relates to someone like Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor can get away with not cooking out, selling out, and being straightforward. You just got elected with a huge mandate. Nothing could tear away the support of your community now after everything that happened. So why not use that as an opportunity to, because you got so much support from the country during the goings on of Uachtaráid and the rest of it, the country and the international community, even people, this big mass support against the likes of the Irish Times over all these years, you benefited from that. When you were being called all these things, there were loads of people came out and said fair play to you and all this. Hundreds of thousands of people who sort of backed you, and they were from the movement of people who were broadly against immigration. So you're in your seat, you're secure. Why not just say nothing, or even give a bit of kudos to the overall movement nationally? Why run away from it like that and sell it out? That's the thing. And he's with Independent Ireland. But so these are you have Phil Sutcliffe, you have Seamus Traynor and Monaghan, you've Paddy Houlihan, who got cancelled by the regime a while back. You have Noel Thomason, your man, John Snell, and in Wicklow, and Tom Hennessy in Cashel. These are people who, to some extent or another, were oppositional to the government's party line on immigration and these issues. So, and there might be more. Niall Boylan is sort of somewhat a different case, kind of like that. But you know, it's just a pity. It's just a pity to see your man like that. But anyway, let's look at God, there's so much going on, so much I want to talk about. You know, I could be here for a while, but I just want to talk about maybe vote splitting and the idea of different parties, different candidates, and how bonkers it kind of is. So I'll share the screen again. Excuse me. You probably can't even see that very well, especially if you're on your phone. But I have here the first preferences, or sorry, the first round of tallies, or whatever you call it, for Ireland South, the EU election in Ireland South. I'm just looking at it here. I'm interested in what you're saying. I'd love to just have you all here and just chat away or whatever. I kind of feel almost lonely talking by myself, but yeah, part of me would just love to stop speaking and just scroll for 2 minutes through your chats, but anyway, I can't. So you have here, if you can't see it, I'll read it to you. So what you have is the top votes is Sean Kelly, this sort of corpse of a man, total Gombeen, total regime apparatchik type of person. He's been around for ages. Fine Gael, I think, yeah. And he's gotten the most votes, which I'll just take a quick detour here, because someone told me that or not someone told me, but I saw someone say recently that a piece of political advice is that when the voters vote the wrong way, you don't come out and call them stupid and castigate them. You say that they were manipulated by media propaganda and the politicians themselves who lied to them, and they're funded with all this money and stuff. So, but you don't go calling the voters idiots or saying that the voters voted wrong, and you know, that's not a good look. But in the case of someone like Sean Kelly getting 122,000 and this sort of I don't know, like this like visibly like not nice man, Billy Keller, getting 91,000, Fianna Fáil, so they got top votes by far. I am just going to put this up as well, which is the classic clip here.
Because democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded.
Yeah, so that's how I feel there about the lads. Like, who's voting 122,000? We're giving 122,000 votes to Sean Kelly. It's just, beggars belief. But anyway, so if you look through this, you have like the big regime-sponsored candidates getting big numbers. But you go down the list, and the first one I'm looking for obviously is Derek Bly, and he's got 25,000 votes. Now Sean Kelly got 122,000, but Derek getting just only 5 times less than him, given that your man he's at all these big positions and he's on TV for decades probably, and Sean Kelly I'm talking about, on TV for decades. How much money did Fianna Fáil put into billboards and posters all over the country, flyers, the whole lot? How many times is he on local radio and mass media from Dublin and all of that? A lot, right? And he, of course, could show up at the GA clubs and start shaking hands, and he could go to the tidy towns and do the circuit and all that, whereas Derek Bly would be like hounded and blacklisted from these things. So and Derek Bly is operating on a tiny budget, and I'll just repeat, heavily demonized by the state, the same state that ultimately support the likes of Sean Kelly. So for him to get just, and it might sound like 5 times might seem like a lot, but to just get only 5 times less than your man, given all of those factors, is very, very positive. There's another one here, Cynthia Nivaraku. I saw her all over the place. She was being pumped out. I haven't seen her before really, but I don't know, she popped out of nowhere. They're pushing her hard. Billy Kelleher posters and billboards everywhere. The rest of it on TV all the time in debates and all, the whole score. So if you take Billy Kelleher, let's say, versus Derek Bly, what's that? Less than 4 times. So what would it be? Like 3.5 times the votes of Derek Bly. Now, Derek Bly is meant to be far right, stealing hats from Ukrainians and all this. That's a different. He did not do that, but pick your demonization story about him. These big gossip columns in the Irish Times, and obviously he doesn't get on telly to just same way they bring on Paul Murphy. If it's a problem of if you're from the political fringe, you can't be on TV advancing your view. Well, why is Paul Murphy? Okay, I know he's a TD, but you name it, one of those. Why are they on TV every second night, leaning back in their chairs? They're so used to it, pontificating away to some presenter who's just kind of nodding along. If you compare that to Derek Bly, imagine if Derek Bly got a fraction of that chance, only once in a while gets on TV and he gets a fair shake to just give his point of view. Think of the difference that would make, not just in terms of persuading the voters, but just being in front of them seeing him, them knowing him. That's what the likes of Saoirse McHugh, she's a good example. She's a perfect example. She's like a cartoon character of an example. So this is perfect. To my mind, as far as I know, and I don't know how she's done this time, but she's thrown her lot in many times in various elections. Until now, at least, she hasn't won anything, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, if you were to go on Google now and just Google Saoirse McHugh and then go to news and sort by time and all that and go back and count them, of course, all positive, all just a blank check in the media, various forms of media, to just say whatever she wants. Saoirse McHugh fights back against the bad guys. Saoirse McHugh, the young up-and-coming star, whatever. And she doesn't really have any popular appeal at all. And she is radically, she was talking about, I had her on Keelan Moncrief's podcast there a few years ago. She said something unfortunate. She said that she wants open borders openly, right? Detestable towards the average voter, surely. Radical, totally fringe, and yet gets a blank check. Think of what if Derek Bly got 10% of that. And my point is he doesn't, and he still got 25,000 votes, well over a quarter of the second top guy. He did amazingly well. And this is there's transfers and all this have to happen I don't really understand it all, to be honest. But in this initial tally or whatever, he got that much. And the second point is vote splitting, right? So if I just let's do a bit of maths here, right? So I'm interested to know what McHugh. Yeah, I'm sure McHugh got fuck all basically. Like she might get in by the skin of her teeth. I don't know, the way these things work. But point is, she's obviously not popular, and like extremely promoted by the media. It's bizarre. I actually can't think of anyone, because Paul Murphy, well, he is a TD now. You could make an excuse. There's no excuse for Saoirse McHugh. There's no logical explanation for why Saoirse McHugh is pushed so much. It'd be one thing if they pushed her because she's a media darling for one election cycle and then she doesn't win, they kind of forget about her. But like just like without ceaselessly for I don't know, is it a decade, forever? She's been promoted as this, like she's the millennial star who's going to represent the disenfranchised millennials or something like that, from like this radical green kind of lefty, I don't know what it is, point of view. But and yet it never takes, and yet they don't stop giving her the fawning coverage. It's bizarre. But so if you look at the vote splitting, right, and there's the people I'll mention here, I'm not criticizing them. They threw their hat into the ring. They had their own reasons. God bless them. This is not a retroactive, you messed something up or you're bad for putting yourself in or whatever. They have their own reasons. They could easily say, well, why shouldn't I? Maybe Derek shouldn't run and his votes could go to me. I'm not wading into it. It's not a personal attack on anyone at all, right? I'm just talking about going forward, just thinking about it, right? One thing you can say about Derek Bly, for the truly independent, truly sort of counter-establishment candidates running on a nationalist ticket, Derek was clearly the star of the show. He was always going to be, right? And so, and as you can see, he got 25,000 votes, a big portion. But if you look at the other people who ran and you start tallying up, I don't think it would necessarily be enough to get a seat, may or may not, but it'd be a big deal. Say, and again, anyone who hears this, like Ross Levy, I'm about to mention here, if he were to hear this clip in isolation, do you get me? So anyone who's watching this, watch all of it. It's nothing on you particularly. I'm just talking about the general idea. So Ross Levy got 4,500, right? And I'm bad at math, so I'll do my best. He got 4,500. If say he hadn't ran, I assume those 4,500 would have gone to Derek. So let's call that 30,000. I'll need to start taking notes here. But 30,000, right? Then you go to Mary Fitzgibbon, sort of health practitioner, midwife, nurse, sound really likable, as is all of them, right? But she ran too, and I think it was. So I'll just go through the numbers. So you've 30,000, and then you add 6,000. So 36,000. Say in theory she hadn't ran, that vote would more or less go to Derek. It might split a bit among others, but let's just say you go to Una McGurk, big fan of Una's as well. 6,000 votes. I'm under counting these to be conservative. She has 6,000 votes. That goes to Derek. So now you're at 42, give or take, right? Now you go to Michael Leahy. Now that's where it gets controversial. He says, we're in a party, we've been around longer than Ireland First. I had a good shot. I didn't get as much as Derek, but I got a lot. So why should I be the fall guy who has to go or whatever? I'm not saying anyone has to go. I'm not saying anyone shouldn't have ran. Just thought experiment. Say he didn't run. 12,000, I mean conservative. It's really more than that. So now you're at 54,000. And this is all just a theoretical exercise. You go up to Eddie Punch. Now, if I'm not mistaken, correct me in the chat ASAP if you can, because I don't want to be wrong, but I think he's independent. But I saw him on Gript talking about the education system is pushing transgenderism and all that kind of jazz, right? You know the rest of it. Pushing transgenderism, focuses on that. Chances are he's probably against crazy mass immigration too. But again, he came in under Derek, so we'll go with Derek. Some people say, oh, well, he's fake op, he's whatever. But without even getting to anyone who's allegedly fake op, you're already at 54,000. So 54, I'm going to put in real ends, right? You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about NAZI, I'm talking about the other one. Let's go with, I'm going to change it, real ones. They're real ones, right? Like no doubt real ones. So you're at 54 there. Now, if you go up to 54 on this chart of how it is currently, so 54 would put, if Derek collected all those in theory, that would put him above Mick Wallace in 4th place. Now, he would be 4th place, just under Cynthia Ni Veracruz, and I think it's 5 seats, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the reality is, for after that, when the transfers play out, of course, there would be not many transfers, and there would be more regime candidate transfers. So maybe Derek, with his 54 in 5th place, might not get there in the end, but he wouldn't have been a long way off, and at least he would have started in the hunt. So it would have been a real legitimate contention there. So that's where that would be. Now let's start adding the people who, I'm not necessarily calling them fake ops, I'm not calling them whatever, but people who are, some people say that, well, independent Ireland ain't too certain independents. They're not like, they haven't demonstrated this long-term willingness or ability to completely throw the 2 fingers up to the state and say, I'll be totally politically incorrect. I'll lean into you calling me far this and far that. I'm not going to run away from it. I'm not going to carefully choose who I associate with because the regime says whatever. That's what, when I say real ones, I mean that those are the heuristics of a person like that, a person who says, listen, I don't have to like everyone, but I'm not going to sort of be holding my nose because they say someone else is far right or whatever. If I like that person, I'll happily stand with that person. As you saw with Mary Fitzgibbon and Una McGurk, 2 very estimable women, and the rest of it. Not that Derek isn't, but Derek balls to the wall on it, right? Like a lot of us. They happily all embraced for a video after. And that's when I see Una McGurk and Mary Fitzgibbon, I don't expect them to agree with everything from Derek. I don't expect, they may or may not like him personally, vice versa. It's not about that. It's about the fact that they're demonstrating that they don't have some sort of firewall up between them and others for no discernible reason, and that's where the mistrust comes in. So I'm just describing my parameters here. So that's the division, right? So whether they're fake ops or not, they come across to a lot of people as that way because as I've described. So let's start talking about them now. So Eddie Punch leans that way. So he's well over, rounded off to 21,000, but I'm going to go for 20,000 to be conservative. He's 20,000. So let's theoretically throw those over to Derek. That's 74,000. Who else have I got? I've got Patrick Leahy, Ain 2. He's 14,000. So that would be 78, 98, if I'm not wrong. No, wait. Am I like thick? 74, 78, 88. Sorry. 88. If you added on your man Patrick Murphy, Ain 2s. Have I got anyone left? Be careful here now to get it right. Yeah, that's all of them. So he would have 88,000 were that to be the case. And of course, it's not an exact science the way I'm doing it. I understand that. But if he were at 88,000, he would be within, for first count, he would be within striking distance of Billy Kelleher in 2nd place. So he would be in 3rd place between Michael McNamara and Billy Kelleher. He would be on 88,000. Maybe less, a little bit less, but he'd be around there. He'd certainly be up and around Michael McNamara territory at 56,000. So that's kind of what I'm saying. So, and if you want to take it differently, let's say you're a big fan of Michael Leahy, right? And you say, oh, I don't, Michael Leahy's brilliant. I love Michael Leahy. He got a fair few votes. And so let's count Derek out instead and transfer it the other way. Either way, the point remains, you could have someone who is in top 3, top 4, definitely within the top 5 up there contention-wise, and then maybe the transfers play out negatively and so it doesn't quite get there. But either way, you would be, and I'm not talking about a developed political landscape in 3, 4, or 5 years' time where we're much further on than this. I'm talking about now. I'm talking about the votes that happened recently. You would actually be in contention right up there in the hunt with the heavily funded, regime-backed Billy Kelleher's, Sean Kelly, Cynthia Ni Veracruz, the rest of them. And then, by the way, the other candidate who is in the top 3, Michael McNamara, 56. He's a bit of a normal politician, been around a while and all that. But a lot of his kudos has come from, granted, a heavily publicized, generously publicized by the state and the rest of it, and because he's a TD, his sort of what's the word? His speeches in the Dáil, condemning Helen McEntee for her irresponsible management of migration and all of that. So, regardless, one of the other top 3 has got a lot of anti-migration votes somewhere there in his mix. Not all of them. The point is, the general anti-regime, anti-migration, somewhat nationalist base within this picture here is huge. It's well up there in the mix with the top 3, really, right? And someone could say, oh, Derek Bly, he's good, but maybe if he were a bit more this or a bit more that, and then I could say, oh yeah, whatever, but you could say it for the other candidates. But the point is, if you take away the Derricks and you take away the Eddie Punches and the Michael Leahys and the Una McGurks and the rest of them, take the people out of it, even take away the different factions, take away the fact that some people call Independent Ireland and A2 a bunch of fake shites, right? And the others are real ones for various reasons. That doesn't affect the fact that all the people who vote for the allegedly fake ones, well, let's say they are fake ones. The people who vote for them are voting for them on this soft premise that they're sort of right wing, they're sort of against immigration and crazy trans stuff and the rest of it. So the voter doesn't really know this is something I slightly disputed with like John McGurk's kind of narrative a few weeks ago, which is the idea that the voters are thoroughly discerning on the difference between Philip Dwyer, Andy Heisman, and Niall Boylan, and someone else, some N2 fella. The voters aren't that discerning on it. Some people are just offered better media coverage. They have more name recognition and stuff like that. So that would describe the difference between the likes of a Niall Boylan and a Phil Dwyer to some extent. What I'm saying is a lot of the difference, it's not all, but a lot of the difference is accounted for by those basic primal factors, mass psychology. It's not that the average voter closely followed everything Niall Boylan said in advance of the elections and closely studied everything Philip Dwyer's ever done and all his good bits, his faux pas, the rest of it, and they're reading every hit piece and they're going through it all and they're thinking, well, what kind of numbers are they both talking about and how far out are they on the spectrum of it? I don't think the massive voters are really doing that. They're just looking for they do have some awareness. They know what crazy far left sort of type of thing and far right or right wing or anti-establishment, anti-political correctness gone mad, all of that. They have a general view. So point is, it's more about the sentiment out there and a bit of name recognition and then just squaring their votes into whatever's in front of them. And in this case, not squaring their votes in, throwing it out amongst an eclectic bunch of people who are different but sort of the same as well. So point I'm making is that you have here a vote. So it's like, even if let's say you think N2 are fake, Independent Ireland are fake, and you prefer Michael Leahy to Una McGurk, who you prefer to Mary Fitzgibbon, who take all that out of it, there's 88,000 voters who wanted to vote for, however they were informed by the media, how much they know about the policies, they wanted to vote for someone who they think is against immigration, political correctness gone mad, turning 8-year-olds transgender, the rest of it, the way the government is managing things from a sort of a right-wing-ish nationalist perspective. There's 88,000 there. And the question at hand is, well, yeah, nothing is perfect. Politics is messy. But surely the common good aim, at least in theory, would be to say, how do we get those 88,000, which is a shockingly impressive number? How do you get those people to all vote effectively for one person, or maybe two when the transfers go or whatever? But how do you square that into an effective voting strategy with candidates? How do you control for all these different personalities? I have no idea. But just at least in a strategic, analytical sense, the point is that you could have someone there who's an independent nationalist, or they could be in a party, whatever. But I'll talk about that in a while. But a nationalist who's sort of ticks the boxes in terms of they're being reasonable, they're not being crazy, too far ideological nationalist. They present well, the rest of it. They have built up a name recognition. They knock on the doors left, right, and center. They do it all, and yet at the same time, they're not sellouts. The people of you who are watching me now, me, myself, we can look at them and think, not everything is perfect. I don't love everything, but they have the blessing and the trust of the vanguard, where they capture the energy. People actually can, unlike Seamus Walsh with his little parochialism out in Galway, right, and the rest of them, they, or the likes of the N2s and stuff, they actually have both the mainstreamness of so-called mainstreamness of like whatever it is N2. No, they're never going to get the media coverage if they're real. But what I'm saying is they are a perfect chimera between a lot of these different things, but crucially they have the faith and the belief with evidence and reason. Like with reason, they have the trust of the base, the activist base, right? And yet they still also are sort of making concessions, being reasonable a little bit, playing the game. A candidate like that, a fantasy human being who steps in and fills that role, and then another fantasy, all these different other candidates who decide to randomly throw their hat in the ring, even though they know they're almost certainly not going to win or get anywhere near it. They all instead decide, yeah, why bother? Like, why bother? Why? I know I'm not going to win. And I know the other fella, if any of us are going to win, it's going to be that other one guy. So why would I throw my hat in? If that all occurred, yeah, you could have, Johnny Nationalist is in there in the mix, potentially taking a seat. And that's not in 5 years when we develop the ground game and as the situation worsens and black swan events and all those things are like almost inevitable. I'm not talking about 5 years. I'm talking about the last few days. I'm talking about now, even at this infant embryonic stage. There's the potential there for a candidate in the running, and yet here's what we have. That's a problem. I'm not everyone's saying this at the moment. That's the big zeitgeist. But I don't think any chart. People say 4 people ran against each other basically in Carlow. I haven't seen the details of that, but it's a small election. This is the Euros, and it's also a big cross section because it's not the local thing where it's a question of how many doors you got around and how nicely you smiled at a couple of people in your town, or they know you from something. This is a very good metric because it's a mass. It's everything from Dublin across to Galway downwards, as far as I know. It's half the country almost, right? So, and no Derek or no even Sean Kelly and no one could have gotten around to everyone or pleased 400 people in a local town personally. So it's a really good heuristic for what's going on out there. It's kind of like a bit of a tragedy in a way. I don't think there's any event really where, let's say, Derek would have gotten it, even if my fantasy were applied here with the numbers. But he wouldn't have been far off, and it would have been serious, serious stuff. And it would mean that, well, hey, we are now basically in the mainstream political ring here in Ireland at the highest level, EU, like at a big level. That would be massive. But of course, it's self-immolating in a way. It's like, yeah, well, we didn't even really get to see that picture because it's all so scattered. So I don't know, am I talking sense there? Am I a lunatic or whatever? Feel free to super chat. I'll read them out at the end. It's like when you stop to in like TV where they pick up the washing powder or whatever and like do a little pitch. A word from our sponsors. A word from, you can super chat if you want to. I have to say that, a little bit for my own sake. But so that's that. But so I'll just I had so many tabs, but I'm just rambling really. The question of parties, like the political parties. Here's the big conversation that's happening, right? It's that, I'm checking my DMs here. Jesus. Okay. So there's a conversation going on in these niche-ish, vanguardy online circles, but it's relevant. There's a conversation happening on, well, shouldn't the National Party, Ireland First, and the Irish Freedom Party, and perhaps, what's it called? The Irish People, even though the latter claims to not really be a party, but I mean, it sort of is, as well, right? It's an amalgamation of people under a ticket, sort of. Like this kind of the idea that all of them should amalgamate into one party. And it's one of those things I'm kind of tortured by, because radical right wing circles are notoriously sort of at each other's throats. It's famously throughout history and stuff. But like the concept is real. And take someone like Patrick Quinlan, who I, gave his dues a while ago. I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking on something like this, but say he were sitting there watching this now, he might shake his head and go, no, 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 no. That's not like, that's just, we just get hoovered up into this big mess, and it ends up leaning towards fakeness and straying from the message, and it kind of bastardizes the whole thing. Maybe we're better where we are, and we pursue our own political aims, raise our own profile, and then in time, maybe as we get bigger, if we basically work hard enough, then we will inevitably become the umbrella party by default, by getting big and having legitimacy among the grassroots and something like that. We don't want to water it down. We don't want to be hoovered up into this thing. And in terms of influencing the other parties, if we're here as a counterweight to the pull of the Independence Ireland's and the A2, the pull of those, then that's overall better for the common good. I'm just spitballing here. What I don't know what he thinks about that, but I'm spitballing what the likes of Patrick Quinlan might have to say about something like that. Perhaps, maybe I'm totally wrong, but those are some of the reasons I can imagine. Then I go to IFP. I from what I've heard, I don't know, but from what I've heard, Herman Kelly has made noises about being open to something. I don't know, is it about forming one big party, dissolving IFP? Maybe not. Maybe it's about having a coalition or something. But it sounds like he's open to it. And then there was one as well, Derek Bly. I should put it up. I'll just kind of paraphrase it. John McGurk shared an article. I should probably read that, talking about how it's this very problem of vote splitting and all these splinter parties all over the place, and how it's a problem. And I saw that Derek shared that and said, you might not always agree with John McGurk here, but he's got a point. Things have to change. So I don't know what Derek means by that, but it sounds like he's at least thinking about that bigger picture, that the general idea in some fashion of like, where do we go from here? What happens now with all these parties and stuff? So that's Derek is showing some interest in not the idea of right now let's all smash the parties in together and be done with it, but just the conversation, the beginnings or the prelude to a conversation, that kind of thing. So that's Ireland First, and that's IFP are showing some signs in some fashion, I think. And then you have the Irish People, and I'm going to have to assume that the lad Anthony Cahill, who's sort of leading or sort of behind that a little bit, I'm just going to assume he might be open to that, perhaps, because I don't know. And then you're back to the National Party, which has been through so much shit in the last year. There's two national parties. I mean, talk about further complicating things. Depending on who you ask, there's two parties. And there's all that, I don't know, is there legal drama and the rest of it? But let's just go with let's just for now go with the James Reynolds, and that's it, and that further complicates it. If you were watching the timeline today, let's leave that out. Say Patrick Quinlan side of the National Party, the I don't know, whatever you call it, right? they are notoriously, in a way, I don't pick favorites, but I like the ideological commitment. I like the fervor. I like all that. But on the so I'm kind of torn because in my view, it's kind of like they what I like about them is the same thing that would perhaps make them allergic to some sort of bigger conversation about, hypothetically, and it's not even that I'm advocating it or saying they should do it or putting pressure, any of that. I'm just saying, in a scientific world, put aside the potential counter arguments that's maybe someone like the National Party could make. There might be good counter arguments. Park them aside for a second and just look at it in a very basic sort of theoretical way. Theoretically, most people would agree that if you could take all the parties, the best of all the parties, smush them together, call it whatever you call it, and that's the party now. And perhaps Ain2 don't join, and perhaps Independent Ireland don't join, but because they are what they are, they don't really see themselves as nationalists. They don't even claim to be. They just kind of sort of run on the fumes of it a little bit, low key or whatever. They are what they are, right? But at least it would be Independent Ireland and Ain2, who are, as some describe, the kind of a shill parties off in the corner, and they do well in their own sense, and they get good media, and they get in, in certain circles, and or they also just co-opt local Gombeen politicians and just kind of put a new badge on them, and they get in. So like they have success electorally because they just took, it's like if Michael Lowry joins Independent Ireland and they say, look, we got a TD elected in Tip. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, did you really, but point being, they are what they are. They're seen as what they're seen as. I suppose they might just carry on doing what they're doing, but at least all the real ones parties, the ones, those, let's say 4 I've mentioned, plus if let's say they formed a super party and it was ran well and it was all the best people from each party, sort of, in terms of leadership or committees and all this, the people that the mass audience, the chat of 1,000 of you are here watching and whoever else, the grassroots online, people that the majority of us would agree are the strongest, most reasonable, level-headed, but also sincere people within all those sort of parties. I could name names, but it would probably be inappropriate to do it. I could just start doing it now. People that all of you would agree, yeah, they've got charisma, they're sincere, they understand the ideas inside out, they're not afraid to be seen with this and that person, they don't do that game. They kind of tick all those boxes, superstar type of people in my view. And I know of people like that in National Party and IFP, the rest of all of them, right? And then there's people who are some people who are either less inspiring or they're more, the mass audience is a bit more divided on them, a little bit less hot on them for various reasons or whatever. And again, it's not a personality contest. I could be one of those people. I could be the last person who would ever be fitting to be part of that thing. And I would just, if that were the case, if that's what people deemed, I would just say, Grant, I don't have a need to be involved in anything. I just want the thing to be the best it is. But say you had something like that and it was arrived at with the right parameters, an agreed ideological direction, an agreed committee structure for how to vote okay and not okay things as you go, the rest of it. If you took all the creams of the crop of all those parties and put them at the top of this, and people who are thoroughly well liked among the grassroots. Again, I wish I could name names to sort of go, you know what I mean, the people I'm talking about. I don't want to do that, but fill in the blanks for yourself. Go through all those different parties and think, yeah, they're well liked by almost everyone. They don't have big warts on them of like, unstable personalities or no good work ethic and stuff like that. Like there's a good chance that like if you were to count me by all those metrics, I'm fickle. I'm a lot of bad things that might not suit that. But and it's fine. It's fine to have that. You could have a role in a party. You could be a big activist. You could whatever. You could be a bit non-neurotypical, we'll say, and an interesting character who does videos, who is a member of a party or whatever. But in terms of how the thing gets run, you take the people who the mass grassroots from all parties agree I really wish I could name all the names and say, listen, we all know these people are well liked by everyone, and everyone knows they're smart, they're committed, they're sincere, they're level-headed, the lot of it. Take all those people, put them sort of in charge of a party. Then the difficult question of, well, who leads it? That's a tough one. That's where it gets really thorny. I don't know how you organize it. But what I'm saying is, in theory, if you could, in theory, put that party together and call it whatever, right? Any hypothetical name I come up with sounds too much like one of the parties, which biases me. I'm like, call it the National. No, I can't say that. Call it Ireland. Oh no, that's Ireland first. You know, this I like whatever. You call it whatever you call it. And you have that going on, and of course an agreed. I'm just doing fan fiction here, like, and you could argue that, well, Garrow, the problem is that that's your vision, but what happens when your vision doesn't correspond with the other person's vision? Yeah, I suppose it's not like my Lego house to build, you know. So point is, if it were my thing to build, then I'd have dictatorial control over it, and that would suit me fine. But some other guy will have a different feeling, so therein lies the problem. But like, what I mean is, like, what I'm saying is not just my view or to suit me. I think it's something that almost all of you watching could sort of agree, at least as a general principle or concept, would be ideal. Would be ideal. And what I wanted to mention is, in terms of the party platform, what I would have, my logic on it anyway, would be that you would take and bear in mind, I don't like making enemies and stuff. So if like National Party or IFP or Ireland First or any of them come out and say, Gareth Murphy talking shite saying we should all amalgamate, we're going to stay strong forever. If you want to do that, that's fine. I'm just working with the concept here for argument's sake. You know, you would also be arriving at, well, okay, well, what are we believing? Because National Party come and say it's this, and Irish Freedom Party come and say it's all about leaving the EU, and Ireland First, it's hard to, they're not so ideological, and Derek isn't either, but let's say he says, I don't know, it's all about hard work and getting up early in the morning and no taxes or something like that. I don't know. He doesn't necessarily be all about that, but he kind of leans sort of that way or something, like a libertarianish kind of feel. And someone says, oh, we should be like, it should all be about like stopping Islamization and left, right, and center. And someone else says, well, no, that's a kind of almost like a classic Zionist thing where Zionists come in and they infiltrate and sort of spend out these parties. It happens all across the West. We don't want that Zionist thing, so let's not sort of be overly all about Muslims like Tommy Robinson, but also let's not be third worldist. And there's like, these sound like petty things, but there are these kind of like all sorts of little ideological issues people might have. And my answer to that, hypothetically, would be something like, if someone were to say, and a National Party has changed a lot over the years, so which National Party I'm talking about, debatable. But what I'm saying is, when most people look at the National Party, if they were to have any critique of it, they might say that the National Party has elements of people who are overly strident. Certainly, I definitely don't think Patrick Quinlan's like that, and lots of others, Jan and you name it. But they could say, well, there's a tendency among the base of the National Party to be very strident and very like ideologically purist and very aggressive in dealing with it, right? In disputes online and ons and the rest of it. Someone could say, well, the problem is they're a little bit too much that way. And that's what, if you look around at the others, that sometimes when they have criticism, it's sort of like that. And then someone else could say, well, IFP, they want to leave the EU, but whether you agree with that or not, it's sort of not on the table in Ireland right now. So you're just kind of, you're dragging down the core message a bit with that, or you're complicating it because you're trying to sell that to people, as opposed to bringing an argument that most people can already agree on or could easily agree on in an uncomplicated fashion without being sort of corrupted or weighed down by the EU. Why not just have an agnostic position on the EU, or a selective, depending on what you're talking about, position? Some people might say that's something to do with the IFP, or or some people would say the IFP have sort of cozy relationship with the kind of British conservative Brexity kind of side of things, and that's sort of like a little bit of a reputational dead weight. And again, I'm not trying to like wipe my hands. I'm not giving you my laundry list of what I don't like about the parties. I'm trying at my best to take each party, then take the rest of them or all the other people who aren't along that way, and think, what do most people, if they have any criticism at all, what is it? It's a sort of like, I'm trying to find what it is. And so those are let's say those two, right? Ireland first. I don't know what it is. Not so much, to be honest. Maybe someone could say, well, they're a sort of a new party, and they don't have this kind of, like, none of the parties are thoroughly organized to the extent of a Fine Gael or something, but they're kind of new, and it's sort of Derek centric, even though you have Phil and you have Darren McGovern, you have new good people and all that, but they could. I'm trying to think of. I don't want to force myself to find some sort of criticism of all these parties. It's not exactly a good idea for me to do that. But like, I mean, you fill in the blank. I don't know what it is, but like, say Ireland first, someone says, well, they're great, just like the others are great for the majority, but say they're great, but you fill in the blank. There's something that a decent proportion of people, well, they agree with 90% of it, there's that 10% they have a difficulty with, or 20% or whatever, 25%, whatever. There's a portion of it that not just one faction, but a lot of factions sort of tend to have is a bit of a stumbling block for them. And the Irish people. Someone could say, well, it's diffuse, but it's not diffuse, and it sort of runs these random candidates and it creates a bit of chaos or something like that. Whereas in theory, it'd be better if they were just some of those good candidates, very good candidates who run under that banner, just ran under a coherent party banner. So let's say that's your criticism of them, etc. Like you take all these criticisms that the majority of people could agree with are, if there was a 10% had to be, not even 10% has to go, but a 10% or a certain percentage of each party, which is basically the raison d'etre for all the parties being different parties, is that they all have these sort of niche, maybe not foibles, but these niche characteristics to them. And you could kind of say, this is all theoretical. You could say, okay, well, the thing is, if everyone comes to the table, there's an agreement to, at the very least, de-emphasize the qualities that, if there's one party, so there's 4 people at the table, the 3 other people are in agreement that there's this one aspect at its extremes isn't totally ideal for a common thing. And then if you take another party, those 3 say, well, there's this one thing of yours that, if there was to be a stumbling block or reason for falling into dispute, it would kind of be that aspect of it. And so all parties agree, okay, we'll take that 15%. I keep moving the percent, and we'll de-emphasize that. We'll work on it. We'll put it a little bit on the back burner. We'll tone this or that thing down, something like that. And thus we'll sort of, that'll obviously grease the skids for this, the friction of trying to amalgamate these parties, obviously. Then there's the governing structure. There's all these other things. But at the root of it, I think the governing structure, you could just look up the Supreme Council in Iran, the Fine Gael party whip system. You could just look like the founding fathers in America did or whatever. Just look up the logically sort of best little amalgamation of systems for how to coherently run and sustain governance within a party, whatever, right? That's more of a technical issue. The ideological thing is the ideological and the personality questions that's where the issue ultimately lies. You'd have to figure out, like, yeah, okay, so how do you take the most, what's the word? The most persistently abrasive and unstable characters, perhaps, within each party, and not shelve them, not throw them away, but say, it's not that you're being cast aside. It's just that we're choosing. It's not about who's being pulled out. It's about who's being put in. So, do you know, that kind of way? It's like any competition, a singing competition. 4 people are up for the prize. 2 people are going to get it. 2 people get the prize because they're deemed to be excellent, and the other 2 might be grand too, but we're just trying to maximize the top list. So you're choosing for stable personalities, people who are able to be reasonable, all that kind of thing, right? People who are crucially people who have demonstrated sincerity and an unwillingness to sell people out under political pressure, all that stuff, right? People who tick sort of all those boxes among all the parties, and you say those are those people sort of up at the top table, decision makers, the rest of it, and the other people could be party members, they could do their thing, but some people are less ideal for being, especially when you're amalgamating parties, less ideal for what is already a sort of a difficult process. So we need people who are very about the common good, reasonable, sincere, all of it. They all go together, form a party, govern it well, great ground game, and then what that party would do. Let's say all that, big hypotheticals, let's say all that were done successfully. It's together, graphics, ground game, governing structure, the whole lot together. A committee of people that everyone goes, you know what, these are the superstars, the most liked and trusted people among the real ones of Irish nationalism among the different parties. Almost everyone looks at that and goes, yeah, there's a bit of something for everyone, and all of them are. I can trust that all these people can get on for the greater good, and it has that credibility, and really good management. It just works well. It's done well. Hard work. Think of how much support that would draw from the grassroots. Like there's 1,000 people here watching, right? Or name the other 50,000 around the place online. Think of how much energy that would create among all those people. All the teething of the different parties in the past is sort of behind us. Some unstable elements are sort of it's basically been selected for through a Darwinian process of years that we've had already. You've arrived at a bunch of people who, they're not chosen by me. They're just, what I mean is it's some sort of, I don't know how it's figured out. A couple of hundred people get in a room. It's put to the audiences online. I don't know, but it's arrived at in some way like that. Think of the energy that would create among the grassroots. Finally, we have our Sinn Féin. We have our, Sinn Féin don't look and go, oh, well, do we vote for Sinn Féin 1, Sinn Féin 2, Sinn Féin 3, or Sinn Féin 4? Think of that would be very demoralizing and negative and disastrous, really, to like any, whatever it is Sinn Féin's policies are. The people who think that they like Sinn Féin, it would obviously be bad. Whereas they have just vote for Sinn Féin, and if you want to vote for the climate change and all that, you vote for the Greens. It's straightforward. If you want to vote for nationalism, even at that, you would still have factions. You would still have 2 factions, but at least it would be straightforward. You would have what some people perceive to be the fake ones, and I don't any two or Independent Ireland person watching who is like watching me now thinking, whatever criticism you have of those parties, where they came from, I'm a sincere nationalist candidate. Why are you tarring me? I'm not tarring you. I'm just saying that's the perception of these parties for a reason, right? You would have those 2 parties, which would effectively be like a one thing. And then you would have the real ones party that has all this energy, all this credibility, and the gap in credibility between let's call them the fake ones, or the perceived fake ones, and the perceived real ones. The gap in credibility would be much more stark, because it wouldn't be, well, these 2 parties who are whatever they are, and then a bunch of different small parties like real ones. It would be much more stark. You would have the ones who have all that credibility from the vanguard and the grassroots online and the rest of it. Then you would have the ones who just kind of, drafting in gumbeans, getting on TV all the time, disavowing even being anti-immigration, really. It would become very, very quickly understood by people, and that would proliferate and spread much more easily. You have this one big super party of real ones. If I think you get my point on that. And then the energy it would suck up, the fact that everyone could go, brilliant. We are now rallying behind this one party that has the best of what we like from all of them, and the worst of what we don't like from all of them is kind of shorn off a little bit, or de-emphasized, or that kind of thing. The generally perceived difficult aspects of each one of them is sort of, that is pretty universal and a lot of people would agree on, is kind of de-emphasized, and the rest of it, you would, because all I see is people talking about how like, oh, I like this person from IFP, but like there's a lot of this, and I like this from, you know, and people have their different views. That goes for all the parties, or even some people kind of like, this is the other thing, I've focused on critiques because I'm trying to sort of, what I'm trying to do is foresee the friction or whatever it is. I'm trying, that's why I speak in this way. But in a more positive sense, which is also true, a lot of people actually don't have big mad critiques of at all four of those things. They kind of just kind of like them all, and they don't have a big issue with any of them. They're not bothered by a perceived strident vanguard wing of the National Party, and they're not even that fussed either way on what the IFP's Euro policy is, and they're not that fussed about. They don't really care. They actually focus on. They just see the bits they like about it all, and they've no problem. But what they do see is four different parties. At the very least, they see four parties, and they're thinking, "Oh my god, okay, it's confusing to begin with. It's not. It doesn't feel like a rallying thing, like a big thing to rally around." It also has, you have five candidates running against each other for ballybollocks, right, or whatever. When the nationalist vote is already, you know, at the best of times, it's going to be limited. It's it's always going to be a portion of the electorate. So you're portioning portions, and so, you know, there you go. But what have we got here? I'm checking. Is there a bit of consternation in the chat? I see Mick O'Keefe says, Jesus Christ, this sounds like collectivism. I don't know, is that the real Mick O'Keefe? He was disagreeing with some stuff today or whatever, so I don't know. I'm not a fan of drama, but yeah, so let's say, I don't know, is that really Mick or not, or if he has an issue or not, but does that sound like collectivism? I'll take the critique, because the point is to address the people who are out there. What are the issues or whatever, right? Because I think most of you will agree, whether it's collectivism or not, right? I don't know what he's talking about there, but I mean, from John McGurk to, like, take Patrick Quinlan, right? Let's say Patrick Quinlan chafes at everything I'm talking about. I assume that he would agree, at the very least, with the general hypothetical theory of the whole thing, as in, like, he might totally disagree that what I'm talking about is effective or doable or whatever. But if I were to say, well, fantasy mode, at the very least, hypothetically, if you can have all that, where most parties get to bring the majority of what they like, what they're about, to the table, and then basically it's like the Godfather, right? Reasonable men sit down and have a discussion, and women. And if you could sort of reasonably hammer out those differences, surely that would be, in a just strategic and basic logical sense, a good thing, right? So I don't know how that, like, I can see how someone would disagree with the practicability of it, or the ideological, maybe. Oh well, if National Party are going to be the ideological vanguard, then you don't want to drown that in the overall thing. Or, you know, you could name the argument to me from any of the parties, or someone from IFP could say, no, it's crucial that we leave the EU. That's what it is. That's the dispute. That's the issue. But I don't see how the general concept of, like, well, why have like 5 candidates in a constituency killing each other before in the crib, as opposed to if they could form a party, at least in theory. I don't see how that like suddenly turns into Trotskyist collectivism, or I just don't. I mean, if that were the case, you'd say, well, Fine Gael is a collectivism, a Bolshevik Stalinist plot. But no, it's just a party that, like, align and form a mass group, and I just don't see that. But I don't know. But so yeah, I just think of the energy that would draw in, and of course the energy would draw in from the grassroots. If it were sort of reasonable, it had a bit of mainstream appeal. It made concessions for mainstreamism where appropriate, but it also held a strong ideological conviction and sincerity and all that, right? It had all that going on. It sort of almost memes itself into being the way Sinn Féin went a bit from Sinn Féin of the 1982 or something to the late 90s and 2000s, where they started to become like Sinn Féin in bright lights, like a party that everyone knows clearly, with this big brand recognition. Well, everyone knew Sinn Féin all along, but you get what I mean, like a party that was in the contention, and had a big voter base behind it, and the rest. Like, if you had that, so yeah, it strategically makes sense. It would activate the grassroots, inspire the grassroots, and then of course all the other people, the random millennials who are like, they're not totally left wing, they're sort of centrist left wing, but they never considered themselves part of all these fractured politics and demonized stuff and all that. Suddenly they see, well, there is this kind of coherent party that seems to be fairly reasonable, but also has a firm commitment to its principles, and all the people at the top of it, there's no weirdos, basically. That's the long and short of what I'm saying in terms of personalities. They're not, none of them are weirdos. In fact, they're all barbecue test appropriate. Like all the people at the top, they could speak to you about ideology and principles all day, and they're strident and radical in a sense. But as just human beings, they're all somewhat neurotypical. They're all personable. And so that has an effect, obviously, right? When people see, yeah, this party leadership of so-and-so's and so-and-so's, the mass appeal could kick off hardcore from there, right? And the other thing, as I mentioned with the Independent Ireland's and Aon-Two's, all due respect to them, there might be sincere people within them. But of course, in theory, no matter how much they were backed by backing from wherever it is, no matter how much media exposure they got, versus this big super real ones party, their legitimacy would start to sort of wilt very quickly, because there would be a dichotomy. There's these two parties that claim to be this thing. One denounces being anti-immigration, basically, left, right, and center, even though that's their sort of base. And the other has a lot of the professionalism and human capital of an Aon-Two or whatever, but they're real, right? You can see how that would game theory play out. So there's a big argument. All I'm doing is taking, let's say, this McGurk article, and if someone thinks Garrod Murphy has gone off on this, where is it here? McGurk, I'll just read this. And like, if you think, oh, Garrod is just, jumping in with McGurk. I mean, I'm a regular critic of McGurk in various ways, so I'm hardly that. But McGurk's putting out his sort of like placeholder landmark of the article of the day, sort of stating the case. And he's, as always, he states it intelligently, even if you don't agree. McGurk, as usual, you might disagree with the fundamentals maybe, or where he's coming from, or his motivations, but there's never an article that he writes where the majority of it is true, that kind of thing. He doesn't write nonsense. Sometimes people say, oh, most of what he says is kind of true, or he does have a point on a lot of it, but there's a poison pill or something like that. That's the idea. Well, look, the fact is, most of what he's saying here, even if you disagree with it in practicability or ideology, the general principle, much like what I'm saying, is unavoidably true. How can you, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, there's no way you can come back and say, no, it's better that we have 5 different parties. It's better that we have 7 candidates running against each other in some constituency. I mean, if put aside the practicability, put aside the ideological, put aside the personality issues, put them aside and square them, because those are arguments I'll hear, right? But and I feel like they could be, in theory, be worked with, but at least I'll hear them and maybe they're convincing. Maybe there's a good argument. I'm looking forward to hearing those, because I think it's one of those things where I can easily see effective arguments being made. I can see there being potential counter arguments, but put those sort of more niche, singular aspects aside. I want someone to come to me and say, no, the very theory of having a super party that effectively was put together is itself bad. Like, the very concept is bad. Like, say you could achieve it, say you got over the personality stuff and the rest of it, it would still be bad in principle or something. Or strategically, it would be bad for fighting elections and all that. It would be strategically negative. I don't know how there's an argument there, so if there's no counter argument to that in principle, then I suppose the argument in principle stands solid, regardless of, I don't know whether it's collectivist or not. But But the reason I say it is John McGurk's written an article about it, and I could find more. I could find loads of Owen Linehan. They're kind of on fellow travelers, so you could say, oh well, that's a niche thing of those guys. But then I've seen loads of examples where there's a thread online from some Anon, well respected Anon among the radical scene and stuff. And then there's a bunch of dozens of other Anons who are also regulars. They're strident, they're not cooks, they're none of that, right? And I've seen a ton of those coming in saying, yeah, I don't see how you convince one party to drop their weapons. I don't see how you get over the personality things. Tragically, there'd be strong personalities. And so tragically, those are the case. But if you could form that would obviously, indisputably be the best thing. And it would be good if we could at least float the concept and think about it, because you can't come away from these elections and look at how it shakes out and avoid that. You can grant what I'm saying and what John McGurk is saying and what 1,000 Anons have said today. You can grant what they're saying and then counter argument to say, well, ultimately, this is why not. But what you have to grant is that there is a issue, and how you solve it or whether you solve it is its own thing. But there's a fundamental problem baked into the cake here, and you can not address it. I don't know. You can say it's worth addressing, but it's not practicable. You can say it's not worth addressing because of this reason, but you can't say that it isn't a problem. I feel like I'm being humble enough in my argumentation there, surely. Someone mentioned Gavin Pepper there, right? In the chat, just mentions his name. But the other thing too is that I can't speak for Gavin Pepper, I can't speak for Malachy Steenson or anyone else. But let's say you formed this party out of these 4 parties I'm talking about. It would draw in energy from the grassroots vanguards online and the rest. It would then have a gravitational center to suck in all these other people who aren't related really to nationalism now at all, but generationally from the Gen X's down would start to quickly be all about it, especially if there were fresh faces, common sense, personable but sincere and principled people at it from all the parties with all their legitimacy. It would suck in those people. But the other thing too is that it would take, and again, I'm not speaking for anyone in particular, but there would be many more cases of some local councillor or even perhaps a existing TD or potentially a Steenson or a Pepper or a Bill Sutcliffe or a Paddy Houlihan or, you name it. But if it played its cards right and was diplomatic, both sincere and radical, but also diplomatic and reasonable, could start to try, in the way that Independent Ireland did with all the Gambins, try to draft in these sort of spare people sort of at a loose end, like Paddy Houlihan, cancelled by the mainstream media, kicked out of Sinn Féin for being not politically correct, being a man of his people in the local community. I don't really know the guy, but you get what I mean. People at a loose end, like it's the same way with Seamus Walsh and Noel Thomas. As soon as they left Fine Gael, they were looking around going, we want to go with something that at least claims to be right wing or an alternative, but still has the kind of sheen and protection of the state that Fianna Fáil does, but the kind of we're new and we're different of actual grassroots party or something. Sort of Independent Ireland, as far as I can see, my feeling is that they were created to that was their raison d'etre, to be that. And they have done it. But what I'm saying is, I don't think this super party that I'm talking about would hoover up sort of a sneaky Gambin, but it would hoover up potentially an inner city councillor or some TD or something like that. If things went right, what I'm saying is it could start to hoover up existing independents who are on our side, but also other independents who could swing that way in time. Defecting lefties, all sorts of stuff, right? It could start to hoover that up and gather a gravitational center and basically build out, right? And then the fight would be to make sure it doesn't lose its heart and soul, as it always is, right? The revolution conquers, as opposed to the system conquering the revolution. that would be because there's always a battle, you know, a struggle for these things to keep it real. But I'd rather that struggle than looking at 7 different parties and 7 different candidates and kind of like doomed in the crib. You know what I mean? I'd rather the problem be, I hope as we conquer the system, I hope as we're rapidly overrunning the system, that they don't find a way to overrun us. I'll take that problem. I'll happily that be my primary reason to be, my primary fight. That's a good position to be in, because if you're not getting to that point, then you're not off the ground at all, really, surely, right? So I don't know if I've gone off. I don't know. It's a notoriously sort of catty world, radical politics, especially right wing. And I usually try to just make it so that just stay the fuck away from me. I don't want someone coming out, taking what I said, misconstruing it, turning it into drama, thinking of it as a personal back and forth, you know, sort of mischaracterizing what I said, and then other people are talking about it. Oh, did you hear this person is versus that person? Or Garrod's versus. I hate that shite. So I hope that I've been clear enough in just the speculation. And it's not that I think I'm not against the parties. If they carry on as they are, great. I'll support all 5 of them or whatever, grand. I'm just saying that this idea is in the zeitgeist. People are talking about it. And my job is to sort of reflect that a little bit and speak to it. So I don't know. I'll be interested in your super chats. I actually will, though, genuinely, because I can't. The actual non-chat super chat moves too fast. I can't actually read it or keep up with it. So anyway, yeah. I felt like that was going to be a thorny, difficult sort of bullshitty issue in a way, because it's just like, it's the kind of drama. That's why nobody wants to talk about it or do it or engage in it, because it's just fucking, it's GAY BS. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I've been on for nearly 2 hours now. I had a big pile of tabs, talk about Pat Rabbit calling people fruitcakes, what Owen O'Brien had to say after these elections. Paddy Cosgrave had a hot take. I was going to look at the European elections. AFD. Oh, by the way, I won't get into it, but what I'm saying is, again, about this amalgamation of parties, it's kind of like in Germany, you have Sarah Wagenknecht, if I'm pronouncing that right. She led this defection from previously being a sort of a left winger. She's now a sort of anti-American neoconservatism, but also anti-immigration. So she's kind of like, probably like a George Galloway, but even more consistent and maybe properly anti-immigration than he is. Like, I think it's a big feature of her shtick, right? And she's got about 5%, I think, in these elections. And then you have AFD, who are the flagship national party, we'll say nationalist party in Germany. They're on like 14-15% somewhere there, and they were on like 5% 10 years ago. From what I hear, that they have got some real ones in the mix. It's a mix. It's a funny kind of party where it's depending on the region you're in and depending who you're talking to. There's people who are real ones, proper, who are in leadership and control high positions within that party. So it's not some sort of total sellout thing. It has some aspects of that. It has some aspects of weak conservatism, but then it's got other stuff. I was talking to someone earlier who's in the know about this stuff, and he said something like AFD has got like a thinly, like barely veiled NS youth, and then like lesbian Christian Democrats or something like that. Like the spectrum runs. You have like radicals and, you know, all this kind of German stuff, and then you have like, yeah, like LGBT, this and that. Like you have different stuff, but the point is that within that party, there are it's real enough. Oh, also you have the like anti-American sort of Russian leaning in terms of just diplomatic relations and stuff as regards the war, that they clearly are anti-American as regards destroying Germany's economy, Nord Stream 2, etc. So they're anti-American hegemony and the rest of it, but they're right wing and strongly anti-immigration and pro-German. but the point is that AFD are sort of thoroughly ascendant, second biggest party now after the Christian Democrats. And their growth rate, if you take the last 5-10 years, if you keep that going, they're going to be neck for neck with could be the biggest party in Germany, which ultimately, and that's while maintaining, at least to a decent, strong extent, a core of strong nationalists. They're out there singing Ausländer raus, and especially their youth. The more radical portion of Germany and within AFD are the younger ones. So it's only going one way, right? AFD are both going to grow in numerically and perhaps become the biggest party in the country. And as they do that, just through demographics, age-wise, within their own party, they're going to get more radical. So, but the point is that with the exception of Sarah Wagenknecht, which is kind of like a defecting left, they're not even really one of the major right-wing parties. You have, with the exception of that, AFD is just AFD. It's not AFD and then AFB. No, sorry, that's a bad way of putting it. Like, it's not Alternative for Deutschland 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? You know, obviously that wouldn't be great. The great thing in Germany now is that it's just AFD. It's just AFD. They are what they are, and they have both grown in scale and popularity and all that. But they've also, by all accounts, to a significant extent, maintained their core nationalism, and in fact, it's only set to grow. Really, I don't see how in any country, whether it's Ireland or fucking, you know, Djibouti, right? No matter what the country, if you're a nationalist in your country, like a sincere one, that has to sort of be broadly the goal, surely, right? Along with all the other little subcultural battles and stuff that the media and everything, in terms of governance and political power, democratically obtained, that has to be the goal, that you have a nationalist party that, yeah, it's had to change a bit over time, and it has to, you know, meet things a little bit in the middle, and it has different strands to it, but is largely sincere and based, let's say, but has also grown massively. And then key, that there's not a version 2, 3, 4, and 5 of that party, all with a little slice of the votes, incoherent. Yeah, that's just what I think. So I'll give you another. I might do these tomorrow night, another stream. But I had Thornton Rat, your man in Thornton Hall, who cut open the gate, like I'm sure most of you saw it, to let migrants in, basically. What a vile person. But yeah, like, I mean, what a visible representation of that. Like, he's literally, they talk about, like, in Spain back in the day when the Moors or the Muslims came in, that certain people opened the gates, you know, the fifth column within and all that. I mean, that kind of general idea. It's like, here you have a man with what's it even called? That's how, like, non-practical I am. What's the word for that again? Power tool, saw, disc saw, whatever it is. He's cutting open the gate. People have put a chain and a padlock on it. And he's literally he's throwing the gates open for the invaders. Unreal. For money, right? And almost spitting at the people who heckle him as he does it. Vile. So that was him. Varadkar talking about replacing Irish candidates with foreign candidates. Mary Lou trying to angle grinder. Thanks. I just couldn't think of it. But yeah, Mary Lou trying to sort of somehow explain what's happening. Simon Harris, who is leaning into sounding like he's anti-immigration, which is smart. If Mary Lou had any sense, she would do it. He's kind of doing that, and it's allegedly having some effect. I'm not sure about that, but it's definitely the smart thing to do from a sneaky rat kind of opportunist perspective. Surely that's what you would do. He's kind of doing that. Well, I just think it's funny because it's like, wait, no, it's your government. Like, I mean, fair play to you for. I don't know if it's having an effect on your votes, because they haven't actually grown their votes. I think they've shrunk, really. It's a bit of a myth that they've done really well or something. But insofar as that might have some effect on shoring up Fine Gael's decline or something, it's funny because it's like, oh, we need common sense. We need to check these people and send them home and welcome them in, depending, but we need to do it fast and have common sense. Of course, nothing happens. It just gets worse. But it's like, wait, no, but you're the government. You've done it all. You've been the government for ages. It shows how, like, it's mad. Like, and I see the likes of McGurk and stuff being like, yeah, I got to give credit where it's due. It's good rhetoric. It's like, well, I'd rather talk about how it's completely nonsense, to be honest. Like how can you be in government, not sending a squad car up to the north to like file their nails, to look like they're catching all the immigrants or something? They're obviously not. Your government are doing it all, and then the most idle, lazy bit of rhetoric is meant to be revolutionary or something to the mind of the public. Go on away. But so they're all full of shit, is what I'm saying. New data from EU shows that CSO numbers on immigrants are bullshit, basically underrated. I mean, I'm talking through all this. See, if I opened all these sources and went through them, I'd be here for another hour. I don't think any of us want that. But the vote share over time, this is kind of interesting. So it's just a visual. Go on, lads, quick. So vote share over time of, I feel like there's something screams out from this graphic to me. I'm not an analyst here, but so you have Fianna Fáil here at the top. They are declining in terms of local election share, right? They're like declining for a long time, right? Fine Gael, sort of the general trend is up and down, but decline. And then you have Sinn Féin, who are very low in the 70s, right up until not too long ago. And they start this ascent upwards. But I would say that that's come to an abrupt stop, and it's basically killed in the crib now. That's the end of that. And then some of the other ones are kind of irrelevant. But basically declining, stagnant. But the interesting line is this middle one. It's the other parties and sort of independence. Which one is this? Is independence? I think it is. Yeah. That independence is this kind of like, that's where the change is. You can see this from any of the stats, but it's nice and visual represented there. It's been up and then it's been down. But my view is that at the end of this graph, if you project this forward, what will happen is sort of these ones will sit here in the bottom. They kind of strangle themselves. These lads will sort of decline. And then this independence or others or whatever will basically be out of all of them. There's basically it's the only one that's sort of crossing the line from the bottom group to the top group. It's the one that's sort of bucking that direction and actually going against it, swimming against the salmon upwards to the right. No one else will be swimming upwards to the right, but that from, where it is. And to me, that's just like, okay, well, there's your fertile ground. All these independents are basically people who are seen, at least, to be against the regime as it is, even though most people don't understand what all that means. They feel that and they're looking for that, right? And so that line goes up to the right. And if we carry on, of course, with like 6 different nationalist parties in some sense or another, and then a bunch of independents who are just kind of opportunists, or some of them are sincere, but they're on their own, they're parochial, the rest of it. Or they're like Seamus Walsh, who runs on a, strident, like almost like a pitchforks and the rest of it, stop these foreigners coming in reality to our town, and then turns around and says, I'm not right wing, I love people, I love immigration, it's amazing. So if it's just left to be that, basically that capital will support this line to go right up. But of course it's unsustainable. You can't just forever have a mishmash of 6 different nationalist parties and then a bunch of independents, all semi-sincere, largely not, sort of forming these coalitions like Independent Ireland, for example, where it's like, okay, so you are clearly a party, but then you use the word independent, that kind of stuff. It's just this mishmash that's unsustainable. It requires coherence, right? And my point about having some sort of amalgamation or some sort of sense made of it is that that's the line that's shooting up to the right against all other kind of trends exclusively. The rest are just kind of holding where they are or declining, basically. And that's the one that's coming up. You want to be trying to figure out how to ride that tiger. Like, how do you, like, ultimately nationalism and anti-regime sentiment is the tiger. So it's like, how do you, saddle that thing up and get the reins on and take it somewhere? Like, how do you do that? How does how does everyone do it for the common interest? I don't know. I'm interested in theories and the rest of it, but so that was that. Just flying through. I could have made a stream of this tomorrow, and I'm just giving it away now, sort of. Ben Scallon had a good take today. Ursula von der Leyen was saying that, we're going to sort of hold up a wall against the extremists who are growing in popularity in Europe. We're going to maintain the center against the extremists or radical or whatever. And he said like that. I'll just pull up the tweet. It was good. It's such a good point. I like objective points that are like thinking outside the box like this. He says, amazing how these people get to position themselves as centrists, despite holding some of the most radical positions ever held in human history. It's so good. That's like people like Ursula von der Leyen, the idea that we can control the climate by, putting up these nonsense bits of infrastructure and burning coal left, right, and center. I mean, in a lot of ways, like, let's say, but in terms of cars and energy, having coal plants and importing turf while killing our own industry and putting all that fuel to create power centers to shoot electricity out to cars and drive around. Like, I mean, that's kind of insane, really, like, and impoverishing people as you do it. Trying to turn children into basically encourage them to change their gender and like cut their genitals and breasts and stuff off like children. Like that's more fucked up than lobotomies ever were, right? They're all for it. Replacing countries with migrants, making Bosnia look like, the animals of Farthing would, right? Type of thing. Like that's what they're creating, building the pyre in front of us. All of these insane things happening. It's not that he's making a like flourish of a bit of rhetoric. That's just literally true. People like von der Leyen and that whole regime that they're a part of, they hold way more radical than anything I ever say on here, right? They hold, because anything I'm saying, I could sit down and talk to a Mongolian farmer, and we're from very different worlds, but I think I'd have a much closer thing to him and to a Argentinian street trader or something, right? I think I would be they'd be like, well, yeah, you're from a different world than me, you're European and whatever, but like we'd all share the basic human views of things, right? Whereas these people are freaks, in what they believe. It's insane. And it is literally, they hold the most radical positions ever held, not in the world now or something, in human history, the most fucked up, radical, disagreeable views ever. And they're talking about the extremes of left and right. Hilarious. But the border fence at the Grand Canal, more border fence there. Insert the point that, they should have a border around the country, not borders around Grand Canal and the iPass Centre, kind of grand irony. There's one, I'm definitely going to talk about this tomorrow. Ryvale House, no planning. How they don't have, basically, like they're putting up these iPass centres now, and where they do actually require planning, like legally, despite exemptions, they're just doing it anyway. They built a whole one in Wicklow with no planning, it being explicitly told not to, and they just keep building it. And I just find it insane. It's like, wait, so I'm in trouble for saying my views. I'm like, I'll be hounded from jobs or targeted in the newspaper or stalked in my personal life or something like that. You know the way it is with so-called far right. We'll get all this shite, but then these people can be behind this and they're grand. The state is like, you're all good, Johnny Ronan, or who, it's not Johnny Ronan, but like some developer prick. Can just totally flout the law, and the state are like, you go ahead. Meanwhile, Sean Mean's like being harassed out of his log cabin, basically. So yeah. Anyway, look, those are just some random. That would have been, if I hadn't gone on so long, I would have covered all those things better. But we're 2 hours 10 minutes into it now. I'll just I'll check super chats and leave it there. So. Occident Advocate, £5, thank you very much, says, well done to Patrick Quinlan. I can't stress enough that nationalists must strive for unity and cooperation. Aaron Gabra, thank you very much, Occident Advocate. Cheers. Roddy Murray, €2, says, super proud today. Well done, NP, IFP, and others. True. And by the way, just as regards my sort of hypothetical rant about what would scientifically, in theory, on a logical level, make sense, given what everybody's saying I'm just, if no one was talking about this, I wouldn't jump in with this big, like, here's my grand theory for how things should work. I would just, whatever. I'm just going with what is being said out there, and I'm fleshing it out or talking about it. But when you put that aside, take them as the individual parties as they are. Fair play to them. Fair play to Glenmore and IFP, Patrick Quinlan, Malachy Steenson and Gavin Pepper, independent, but whatever, all true people who did very well. I mean, it is a massive achievement. We've gone from nothing to something, and someone like Gavin Pepper didn't get elected by just throwing his hat in the ring and kind of forgetting about it. He had to work for it, and that's what's important. Roddy with another 5 says, thank you, obviously, says, so who controls the Irish right? Remember, donations in British pounds means they are controlled by the British. NAZI, Britbong, Shamalama, Ding Dong. You've got me dead to rights there. Controlled opposition. But thank you. Name I can't pronounce says, or gives 249. Give me your passwords or I will hack the election. That's funny. It's a Russian name, so it's a joke. It's a little joke we have, going on, a little in joke. So that's like between the British and the Russian controllers coming in hot and heavy there with the massive super chats. Thank you. So Luke with 2 quid says, if we were brown, you would have let us in. Oh, about British. There's even more British shenanigans going on here, but yeah, I get the idea. Thank you though. Roddy with another 2. Thanks again. Says KGB agent in the chat. Patriots are not in control. Nice one. Thanks. James Antaward 6 says you were spot on. All these votes to Derek would have put him right up there. Yeah. Again, whether I'm collectivist or not, I don't know. Am I crazy? Have I lost my marbles? Have I become some sort of tyrant control freak for just looking at that and seeing it for what it is, or what? Like I don't know. Maybe I have. And then Armchair Limerick Nationalist with 5. Thanks again as always. Garrod, we definitely need a united nationalist front, but a victory for our side. Sorry. We definitely needed a united nationalist front, but a victory for our side overall. Hope Boylan gets in. Sound for the ramble. You're welcome, as always. Cheers. Yeah, I agree. Someone like Niall Boylan, like I might sound scathing in my IFP and not IFP, sorry. All these fucking, that's one reason to amalgamate the party, so I don't have to remember all these letters. Independent Ireland. So they... I don't mean to sound like I'm lambasting them or whatever. There's probably grand candidates among them and stuff, and activists and other people working within that system, that party, who I know, and some of them are sound and stuff. But I'm speaking generally, and I'm just kind of putting forth a point that most people tend to sort of agree with. But it's not that I have it out for anyone in particular. Like Niall Boylan, I can't read his mind. Is he a shill or is he real? I fucking don't know. Sorry, the cursing comes out when it's late, right? But I don't know. Like, I'm not a mind reader for the guy. Like, maybe he has mixed motivations. Maybe he's whatever. Maybe it's complex. I don't know. But, was he brought into a room by the deep state and told run as a fake candidate? Or maybe he's a bit cynical and opportunist. Or maybe he actually totally believes all this stuff, but he's just a bit moderate. I don't know. And what's the motivation of the party? I don't know the answers to those things necessarily. People can speculate, but one thing that's for sure is that Niall Boylan getting voted in is better than him not getting voted in. I think that's fairly reasonable because, for one, he might be sincere. He might have an influence sincerely on these kind of issues, or at least on the excesses of these issues. He could be a voice. So he might not agree with all of you 100%, but if something crazy is happening, he could bring voice to it as an MEP. So he might, you know what I mean? So when the craziest of things are going on, when the Newtown Mount Kennedy is going on, when some kid is getting stolen from their parents and turned into trans or whatever by the other one, or they're barred from stopping it or whatever, he might jump in on that. And sure, look, he's going to do that, and Billy Kelleher sure isn't. So, or whoever else, Kieran Cuff or Lynn Boylan. So I'll take Niall Boylan. And then the other reason it's important, regardless of what you feel about his motivations or something, is that the people who vote for him, whatever you might speculate about him or whatever his motivations, they're at the very least they're voting for him because they think, correctly or otherwise, that he is anti-regime political correctness, immigration run amok, the rest of it. So, and he's the figurehead up there, he's the big name, and so people vote for him, and it is what it is. That's a fucking great thing, you know. So, like, you know, it's just, if I sound like I'm being scathing or whatever, I'm not. I support these people getting elected over the alternatives by a long shot, like, definitely. And I don't think that they're all, as individuals, necessarily scheming and the rest of it. Not necessarily, right? So, you know, I just don't want to sound like I'm being a bitch towards people, like, or whatever, being a, you know, ratty sort of finger pointer, you know. I don't want to be too much like that with people. So Emmanuel Godson says yellow. Is it the jumper, or is it just an abstract idea, or is it the Coldplay song? I'd say you're just Emmanuel Godson is in his yellow phase, like Picasso. That's what I'm gonna think of. Any more paintings going, or what's the crack? I don't know. I would be interested to know if you don't have to super chat. You can just find me online, some text me or whatever you can. Be interested to know if you're still painting. Anyway, we'll find out at some point soon. So thanks, Emmanuel. Then James Bond says, your carbon footprint will never be as big. That was the same one from the other night, lad. Your carbon footprint will never be as big as NATO or Sinn Féin. They import more paddies every day. Was that an AI comment, or maybe it's just you putting your views across? But either way, thank you for the £5. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I'll see you soon, and take it easy. Ihawa.